I don't view China as an enemy. I don't even view it as a threat, by the way. China can't invade the United States. China can't defeat the United States. But at the same token, the United States can't invade and defeat China. This is two great powers. And I think there's a lot of mutual benefit in good relations.
So recently, Jeffrey Sachs was on the Krasno UNC podcast and talks a little bit about U.S. relations with China, its trade relationship, and why he doesn't consider China an enemy, despite the fact that a lot of people, especially on the populist right, certainly consider it so. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's watch and react.
I think we are in a new era, and that is that and Secretary Rubio said it early on as in his position as Secretary of State, that we are now in a multipolar world. Now, what multipolarity means is that there are many centers of power. The United States, Russia, China, and India, at the least, are centers of power. If Europe ever gets its act together, it would certainly be a superpower. Right now, it's a divided 27 countries, but it's a $20 trillion economy and a very sophisticated economy. So it would be, and with a nuclear, with nuclear arms in France. So it would be a superpower too. I think we've been multipolar for a long time and that the United States exaggerated its power for a long time. But now it's recognized that we're in a multipolar world. But what's not agreed is what is the implication of that? Is the implication that now the great powers are going to go after each other? Is the implication that they're each going to respect their own turf, but act like bullies in their own neighborhood? Is it going to be that we'll have multipolarity and multilateralism, which is a completely different concept? Multipolarity means there are several powers. Multilateralism means that there is an international rule of law. I'm in favor of multilateralism. I work for the UN. I work with the UN. I believe in the UN. It's extremely weak. I would like to see it strengthened.
So I love Jeffrey Sachs. I adore him. I think he's right on so many foreign policy questions. I don't want to see the UN strengthened. I don't want to see globalism in general strengthened. Globalism is the biggest affront to local sovereignty in the world. Whether you want to call it national sovereignty or state sovereignty or communal sovereignty, all the way down to the individual, it's better if localities make decisions for your respective locality. Down to the individual, down to the family level and the individual, because you have so much more power over things that occur near you. Even Washington itself is overtaken with insane amounts of lobbies that hold power over politicians. We have, big food, big pharma, the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby, etc. And there's no hope for the average citizen to even influence them. What do you think would happen if we take that a step higher, defer much of the U.S. sovereignty to the UN and these global bodies, and they're essentially running the globe? I think he's wrong about this, but all other things I think are right. You'll never hear me compliment Rubio again, but I was actually satisfied and quite surprised when he talked about the fact that we are now living in a multipolar era. That's something that's been true for a while. And it's a very stark contrast to what Charles Krauthammer, the famous neocon, said after the fall of the Soviet Union, proudly and triumphantly announcing that we live in a unipolar moment and we need to take advantage of that by asserting our military dominance across the world. That's essentially what all the neocons were saying in the 1990s. So Sachs is right. Both powers can benefit. And we've seen the rise of India and Russia. India will overtake all countries by several times in terms of population pretty soon, too. And that's significant as well.
To my mind, that would go a long way to making the world a safer place. So I want to move to a multipolar, multilateral world. The United States psychologically has a hard time with this. If you read Foreign Affairs magazine, as I do every issue, most of the articles in most of the issues are to reassure the readers that America still is number one. It still dominates China. China's still far from this. China's economy is about to collapse and so forth, none of which I believe for a moment. But I think the United States psychologically, in our ideology, we have been we've been the leader for a long time. This is the American century. We're the sole superpower and so forth. I think we have to come to the understanding that there can be other powers that are not our enemy. I don't view China as an enemy. I don't even view it as a threat, by the way. China can't invade the United States. China can't defeat the United States. But at the same token, the United States can't invade and defeat China. This is two great powers.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to deny that both powers benefit from each other despite all the vitriol toward China from especially the right. You see it from the establishment left, too. And they're our third biggest trading partner. Americans would suffer immeasurably if we lost out on the textiles, the machinery, the consumer electronics, all the goods and services that Americans import from China. And they would lose out from many of the services that Americans provide too if trade relations were completely disrupted, which it does seem to be the case that Trump is pulling back the tariffs even on China to some extent. At one point on some things, they're up to 140%. It looks like he's walking those things back a little bit, which I think is a good thing. In many ways, I think the right is as wrong-headed toward China as the left is toward Russia in terms of, their apprehension and fear and trepidations, as if China's the one that's seizing almost half the wealth of the average American, as if China's setting up a surveillance state on the U.S., collecting bulk data in mass stored in the NSA, as if China is, destroying our dollar by the Federal Reserve printing it, as if China is running the drug war, as if China is the one invading countries on behalf of the U.S. and launching proxy wars against nuclear powers. It's not China doing that. It's your own government. And as far as I know, I don't think China's even launched a major war since the invasion of Tibet. The U.S. has fought China in proxy in the Korean War, but really not since then. It's not a bellicose nation, despite what you hear from the propagandists that would want nothing more than a proxy war with China. You see rumblings of that from the right now, especially when it comes to our relations with Taiwan. A lot of people would have you believe that if China was to invade Taiwan, which I don't think they're going to do anytime soon, that the U.S. must step in, intervene, and create a new Ukraine in Taiwan. Well, I think that's a horrible decision for all the reasons that Jeffrey Sachs mentions and the ones that I did.
And I think there's a lot of mutual benefit in good relations. So that's the kind of world that I would like to move to: multilateral, stronger United Nations. I'm not in favor of the sovereigntist argument, which is the Trump administration argument that a great power like the United States requires freedom of action. We do what we want. No one tells us what to do, least of all the UN. That point of view, I don't agree, because I believe that we rightfully bind ourselves to international agreements so that we can cooperate with each other and reduce conflict.
So peace and negotiation doesn't require these globalist institutions. So not only would I not want to strengthen the UN, I would want the US to completely withdraw from the UN and defund it, because the US is carrying much of its bill and it's still based up in New York, footing the bill for a lot of it. And as we've seen, its presence doesn't exactly stop the US from launching its criminal wars in the first place. And it never did. Its prototype never did. The League of Nations didn't really come into being. That's something that Woodrow Wilson desperately wanted. But since the UN was created, there's been lots of wars. It doesn't exactly have the effect that people that idealize it believe it to. Unfortunately, I think that Sachs is mostly in that camp, even though I think he's right on all these individual foreign policy questions. He does lean far more toward globalism than I would. One thing that I would love for Trump to resurrect is, even if he doesn't intend to follow through with it or really try to do this, bring back his rhetoric that said we should leave NATO. It doesn't make sense to be in NATO. That's another kind of globalist institution that the U.S. runs, the U.S. spearheads, foots the bill of, but it really is just an excuse to get us involved in more of these wars on behalf of Europe. We're subsidizing the security of Europe at times, and then at other times we're playing chess games with world empire and empire building, especially like we are doing now in Ukraine. So leave the UN, leave NATO. I think Trump has flirted with both things. I wish they would come back now. That's great rhetoric, and it'd be awesome policy.
That's why we have the rule of law. That's the Hobbes-Locke idea of the social contract, which I believe we need at the global level.
Thank you. How can you be so sure that we are moving towards or have already arrived at a multipolar world? Doesn't it look at the moment as if we were heading towards a new bipolar world, only this time China and the United States, or the United States and China? Because the European Union, as you rightly said, isn't really on the same level. Neither is Russia, I would say, and India isn't either. So isn't it really still bipolar with lots of disciples to each of these powers?
Yeah, I tend to look at this through an economic lens. So I look at the size of the economies, at their productive capacity, and of their likely trajectory. And when I do that, I don't see China, for example, as becoming the world's hegemon, certainly not. I don't see the United States disappearing from sight. I do see India becoming much more powerful because it's going to be the most populous country in the world by a wide margin. Maybe it will be 400 or 500 million larger than China within maybe 30 years. I don't have the UN projections immediately in front of me, but it's going to go to 1.7 billion, whereas China's peaked. And China's on a trajectory to get to under 1 billion people by the end of this century. So when I do the kind of the back of the envelope calculations, China's share of world output is basically peaking about now because of the population decline that's coming. India's will rise, Africa's will rise, and Europe is going to get its act together somehow.
Yeah, I think he's mostly correct here. What's interesting, too, is that China's population decline has been going on for some time. They kind of axed the one-child policy a few years ago, and even despite that, it's still on the general decline. So I think he's right about kind of how the powers are being asserted and structured and where they're likely to go in the next few years.
I don't know whether it'll be now or 5 years or 10 years, but Europe is a civilization, even though it's fought each other for 1,500 years ever since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But nonetheless, Europe will get its act together. So we'll be in a multipolar world, not a bipolar world. For the moment, the US and China definitely lead, for example, in AI, in many key technologies. But I was just in India last week. The progress is very rapid. The scientific and technical skills are rapid. The India space program is rapid. Technology diffuses. Smart people are all over the place. If there's peace, there will be what we call economic convergence, which is that the poorer countries will grow faster than the richer countries.
Yeah, we live in a global economy. All powers in that global economy benefit from trading with other people that live in other powers. You know, people like to still kind of cling to this mercantilistic, pre-capitalist view that, there's only so much wealth around the globe and one country needs to dominate the others in terms of trade deficits and conquest and things like that. But really the point of a global economy and free trade is that two parties benefit from every transaction with each other. And that doesn't stop being the case if they're within different geopolitical boundaries. If I trade something to a peasant in China and he benefits from that, I benefited from it too, because his money was worth more to me than whatever I sold him, and vice versa. That's the case. So with all trade, it goes on for the mutual beneficial capacity of both parties, and it, you know, still remains the same if there's a company involved. And people like to say that, you know, this trade deficit that we have with China is just, it's too high. They're taking too much of an advantage of us. But a trade deficit innately is not a bad thing. I have a huge trade deficit with Amazon. They bought literally nothing from me, but I benefited incredibly from all the goods and services that I purchased off of Amazon. So it's interesting that so many demonize China, but again, the U.S. benefits immeasurably from China, the cheap products we get from China, and I think it behooves us to be in a good relationship with China. Are they trying to launch cyber attacks and get advantages by trying to acquire data from U.S. citizens? Of course they are. But what makes you think that the U.S. isn't trying to do the same with China? That's what all powers have done throughout the history of the world. They're not trying to confront us militarily. They don't even have the capacity to project a major war beyond their borders to any respectable length. What do they have? One aircraft carrier or something like that? They don't even have a war machine, despite how they're propagandized and drummed up. So I think Sachs is largely right here. We do live in a multipolar world. It's better to have good relations, especially with nuclear powers, than sour ones like we have with Russia now. And now we're in a second Cold War because of that. Hopefully that gets diffused soon, and we move on. But I do want to hear from what you guys think. Do you consider China a major threat to the U.S. or a greater threat to your liberty than your own government? Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you on that. I don't think, for the record, that China is as big of a threat to my liberty as my own government. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll check you later. Catch you in the next one.